Hey everybody, hope you're all doing all right. Wanted to start off our week with just elaborating a bit on some conceptual things that I think are important to kind of wrap up our understanding of this unit. I know it's been a little bit choppy, like getting started, and then we have like a break, and then we wind up now going to virtual school, and we had a project in there in between, and as part of that. And so, but I wanted to highlight some themes that I think are really important to understand in terms of understanding mentality toward this final bit of this unit, which is on imperialism and the mentality of Europeans there. Hopefully, you saw a bit in the slideshow that we looked over at the last class or the one before on industrialism and how and industrialization, how that impacted imperialism. And I wanted to look here because often, even missionary efforts, which we as Christians would maybe see as, oh, yeah, of course, those are a positive thing. We celebrate missionaries, we have them speak at our school, and we have Missions Week dedicated to hearing from missionaries about their work. And we pray for them and their work, and we see them as not only meeting spiritual needs in leading people to Christ, but also physical needs, going and providing food or shelter or opportunities and these sorts of things. But there's actually, believe it or not, a whole perspective out there from non-Christians that would view missionary efforts as a pretty negative thing. And they'll tend to accuse missionaries of participating in something called cultural imperialism. And what that means is you have an effort kind of just to stamp out a local culture in favor of your own, that theoretically these missionaries disrespect a local culture, and so they just want to go in and make them do things their way. And so I wanted to get into a couple, it's like contrasting viewpoints. One, which is social Darwinism, which we've talked about a little bit before, which can lead to something called eugenics, which I'll get into, and then a counter perspective, which would be the efforts of Christian missionaries in Africa. So I'm going to start off, but well, really, mostly we'll just kind of be reading together. I thought about recording myself on video, like my face and everything, but it's easier for you just to follow along. I'm largely going to be reading and then just kind of elaborating on some things I'm reading. And then I will also share those articles with you so you can reference them yourselves there, so that if you need to go back into something, you can analyze what I was saying just by what you read. But the bulk of what I'll be doing will be reading through those articles and then commenting on some things such as words that might be unfamiliar. And I'm realizing it might not quite fit into the 15-minute front time frame I have here, so I might need to record two videos. But in any case, hopefully this will be illuminating for you, help you understand some things a bit better. I was wanting to come back to that later. So, starting off, going to look a bit at Darwin's theory and social Darwinism. Okay, and I'm just going to read here starting off. So, scientists and political activists during the past century have drawn on Darwinian theory to promote one utopian crusade after another, including forced sterilization, scientific racism, euthanasia, and an ever expanding government justified in the name of the evolving Constitution. Euthanasia, by the way, is another word for mercy killing, usually associated with the elderly. Could be used in some other contexts, but that tends to be when we see it like someone who, oh, they'd just be better off dead, so we as a society should just kill them. The typical response of Darwinists to this record of, quote, coercive, quote, social Darwinism is to deny that it has any genuine connection to Darwin or his theory of evolution. But when one examines the historical record in detail, the effort to disentangle Darwin from social Darwinism is hard to maintain. This can be seen most clearly in the case of eugenics. Eugenics was the science of human breeding, and it resulted in the compulsory sterilization of more than 60,000 presumed, quote, defectives in the United States by 1958, including many who probably would not be considered mentally deficient today. The intellectual leaders of the eugenics crusade were largely university-trained biologists and doctors, and they pushed for eugenics because they thought it was fully justified by Darwinian biology. It should be stressed that eugenists, sometimes called eugenicists, represented mainstream evolutionary biology, not the fringe. So these were right in the middle of how people thought. They weren't on the edge of thinking. They weren't extremists, right? In terms of how, relative to the average person. Okay. And they were affiliated with institutions, well, we'll get all that. But eugenics' underlying fear was articulated by Charles Darwin himself in The Descent of Man, where he criticized modern society for undermining the, quote, natural process of elimination by building asylums for the mentally ill, homes for the handicapped, hospitals for the sick, and welfare programs for the poor. Darwin was even concerned about vaccinating people against smallpox. Quote, no one who has attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. Hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed. Darwin does go on to indicate that we can't follow the dictates of hard reason in such cases without undermining our sympathy, the noblest part of our nature. But such misgivings represented a lame objection at best. If Darwin truly believed that society's efforts to help the impoverished and sickly must be highly injurious to the race of man, meaning very harmful, then the price of preserving compassion, in his view, appeared to be the destruction of the human race. Framed in that manner, how many people could be expected to reject the teachings of, quote, hard reason and sacrifice the human race? Darwinian political theorist Larry Arnhart whitewashes history when he argues that Darwin was only concerned about, quote, good eugenics, such as banning incestuous marriages. If this were the case, why did Darwin warn of the dangers to the human race of helping the poor, caring for the mentally ill, saving the sick, and even inoculating people against smallpox? Darwin clearly supplied a logical rationale for eugenics in The Descent of Man, even if his personal scruples made him ambivalent about pressing his concerns to a logical conclusion. His followers, of course, were not so squeamish. So there's maybe some unfamiliar words in there. Scruples mean like your personal morality, and squeamish means something that would make you uneasy, like even an unsettled feeling in your stomach. So, in other words, okay, Darwin has this theory about the advancement of the human race and kind of the implications for what that should lead us to do in terms of our actions. And but he says that this is kind of butted up against with our compassionate side as humans. He's like, we know that really anyone who's bred animals knows you need to breed just the best of animals. But unfortunately, in his mind, human beings do have this sense of conscience, and so that's kind of getting in the way. But he's like, well, what can you do? That's kind of just what we have to accept about ourselves. But later, people who kind of took Darwin's ideas and ran with them weren't quite so reluctant to take his ideas to their full conclusion, which is actually, yeah, we should try to produce the best biological humans and not show compassion to those seen as lesser, seen as worse. Okay, those who insist that eugenics was somehow a distortion of Darwinian biology must account for the fact that the vast majority of leading Darwinian biologists for several decades clearly thought otherwise. Indeed, they promoted the tenets of eugenics as strict corollaries of the theory of organic evolution. They had a point, meaning that these were ideas that went hand in hand with an understanding of Darwinian evolution. If one truly believes that human progress is dependent on a vigorous struggle for existence, then any diminishment of natural selection in human society will raise legitimate concerns, and efforts to reinstate selection through eugenics may well appear rational. Indeed, once one understands the evolving nature of human nature, it is difficult to see any principal objection to all sorts of efforts to transform human nature through bioengineering. I'll just keep going. Larry Arnhart attempts to outline a Darwinian argument against radical human bioengineering, but his argument is less than persuasive. I'm just going to skip his quote. Natural selection is a messy, hit or miss process of dead ends and false starts. Why shouldn't human beings use their reason to direct their evolution in order to produce a new kind of human being? What is so sacrosanct, which means sacred, about existing human dispositions and capacities since they were produced by such an imperfect and purposeless process? Arnhart seems to want to clothe human nature with a kind of sacred awe that will restrain human beings from tinkering or messing with it. But such awe is alien to the Darwinian mindset. In his autobiography, Darwin recounted how he had once had such feelings, but they had evaporated. He lamented, I will remember my conviction that there is more in man than the mere breath of his body. But now the grandest scenes would not cause any such convictions and feelings to rise in my mind. In the Darwinian framework, there is nothing intrinsically right about the current capacities of human beings. So there can be nothing intrinsically wrong about trying to alter them. Indeed, human nature in its traditional sense is a non sequitur in Darwinian terms. So to unpack that a little bit for you, What this is kind of saying is, well, there's nothing that says that the version of human beings that we have right now is inherently better than some version that we might be able to create. Nothing that tells us, oh yeah, no, we need to protect the way people are. So in light of that, if we can improve people, well, we should do it. But that obviously has some things you extrapolate from that, some conclusions that are going to be pretty morally chilling about destroying those who are seen as weaker, as worse, as not biologically fit, we would say. Um, yeah, the word non sequitur, by the way, means like a thing that just doesn't follow from what your prior presuppositions. When you've concluded something else to this point, you can't just do this jump in a random direction to say that no, but actually we believe the current human being is the best, is the most moral, is the what we should strive for, strive to protect. In the end, Arnhardt's main arguments against radical human bioengineering are his prediction that it may not be technically feasible and his hope that it may be restrained by certain deeply ingrained human desires. Let's certainly hope so. But Darwinism itself provides little or no barrier against such schemes. As Carson Holloway points out in The Right Darwin, the Darwinian account of morality all but invites, quote, wholesale biological engineering. Okay, so just to kind of illustrate a little about what eugenics is, this is a little chart I put together to show you. Eugenics is the effort to improve the human race, and that has taken on varying degrees in terms of how people perceive that should be done. With the most extreme, and this is what's usually associated with eugenicists or eugenists, would be Nazism. This comes along in the mid 20th century, and they would say, "Hey, let's exterminate all undesirable people." That would be, the homosexuals, handicapped, and of course, primarily the Jews. Then a little bit below that, you have this idea of euthanasia or mercy killing. That's not really a mercy, but killing people not really seen as useful anymore. Maybe they were at one time. A step below that would be forced sterilization of imbeciles, which is a technical term it used to be for people who were mentally deficient and of anyone of inferior races. So, well, we're not going to kill anyone, but we will sterilize to make sure that people can't reproduce further. And then the least extreme, which believe it or not, this least extreme version of eugenics existed even in South America for years and years. You had leaders in places like Colombia and also Venezuela and Brazil and many others that said, you know what, we should limit immigration based on racial grounds. Now, people can make arguments about how we limit immigration in numerous ways, and I think that you can make good cases on moral grounds for keeping some people out of your country. But when it gets to this idea of, well, we just want to have a more racially pure society, this would be a form of eugenics. And that can be done by a perception of, well, we should limit immigration, or we should actually encourage immigration, but from desirable populations, from people that we think are going to make our racial makeup better. And often that meant encouraging immigration from Europe and say, we want to whiten our population. So this was a widespread belief at one point in time, and it owes all the way back to Charles Darwin. Obviously, you can't just blame everything that came after him on him, but he did create the idea that it's tough to see how the conclusions you reach from his initial beliefs aren't valid conclusions. That doesn't mean they're right to conclude, but if you take Darwin as your founding principle, this is where I believe it ultimately leads you.